calling this back where we are?
Yes.
Hey guys, so
What about
yesterday,
middle?
my clan and
Why
I
would you
successfully
middle
completed
back?
the
Just
day one Chronosaurus raid.
Sure.
So
We
one
placed
in the back, three
17th in the
front.
world.
1, 2, 3.
So
Nines.
we wanted to get some kind of tips and tricks out on things that might help you
I think 3's
in
fine.
each encounter.
Nobody cares.
Yep, 3's fine.
So the
Which I
first
think-
encounter
Yep.
is the bridge
Right,
building,
3, 2.
and in this encounter, it introduces you to a lot of the mechanics found throughout the raid.
This has been
The
cleared.
main
so there's
thing
no,
being
there's no,
the Witch's Blessing
yeah.
twist or anything at the end.
buff
It's
slash
it's really-
debuff, kind of works both ways. So when you have this, you'll be able to damage certain enemies while not being able to damage others. So it's important to be splitting your team appropriately. So what we found useful was having 3 sub-teams and 1 person on each team taking the buff and
Right,
1 person
20
not taking the
seconds.
buff.
Should we do it?
And then
No,
at
middle. Now.
the 20-second mark, we would make sure to split off at
good
the
switch.
Witch's Vessel that's located
Yep.
at the
Crystals?
front of the encounter.
I don't see it. I don't see it. Fuck.
In terms of team comp,
This would not spawn.
throughout the we didn't really realize this
They're
until
not
the very
responding,
last
but they're
encounter,
up, they're
but
up, they're
I think
up,
it's
they're up.
important to get this down first. 3 Warlocks were very helpful for the wells, along with 2 Hunters for tethers, and then the Titan's utility came in very handy in the later 2 encounters.
Yeah.
So
Even-
what did you think, Dark and Chip?
Mid.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So this is
Middle.
Chip speaking. So with team
Like
comp,
Rogers?
there will be a lot of times where you
Dropping
need to split
dropping
into
well.
3 groups, and having 1 warlock per group is fantastic. There's a lot of ad clearing to be done, and even with the Orpheus nerf, that's still fantastic utility
What
for
is that?
getting rid of
That's
both
good.
big bosses and
Crystals?
groups of ads.
Reload.
So I think it's super important to have
30. Wait for a little bit.
at least 3 warlocks and maybe 1 titan.
All right, everyone ready? Well, you also need to. So this is Dark speaking. You also need to be careful about
Go.
being split at the right times and then reconvening back as a group at the right times. So during ad clear phase, the teams of 3 need to split off. Sorry, the teams of 2, 3 teams of 2 need to split off and take care of their ads and cover their crystals. But we found it really useful to come back together as 6 on the Witch's Vessel.
At around the 20-second mark.
Right, so that we could reconvene, we could heal, we could swap buffs comfortably, and about halfway through each rotation, additionally, we dealt with the ogres at that point in time as a group of 6, not as a split. Because if you're trying to take the ogres on as a group of 2, only one of you can damage any given ogre. So you're pretty much soloing an ogre on your own side if you stay split. So it was really nice
Yeah.
to be able to just sit in a well as a team of 6. 3 people look left, 3 people look right, and drop the ogres quickly. Crystals, you see it? L3.
Yeah. So I think now we need to talk about
Nice.
kind of the format of the encounter itself. So we mentioned the buff,
What are we doing on time?
or the debuff,
30.
depending on how you look at it. So when you
Next wave
get
is ogres,
this, it starts a phase,
Okay. So let's
and
switch. Let's
as
switch
you're
now.
switching, you're going to see crystal spawning. And these crystals can only be taken out when someone with the buff and without the buff
Be ready
shoot
for
it at
ogres.
once.
Get the res. Did you have or not?
I didn't have.
So when
Perfect.
when you're doing
Find your
this,
ogre, find your
once you
ogre.
split away
Last time,
from
right?
switching the buff at the Witch's Vessel, you want to split into
What's
a
this
left, a right, and a mid team,
Alright, get your spots.
and make sure you have callouts for where the crystals can spawn.
Crystals. L1.
Yeah, the map
So
for
we
that
just went
first
with-
encounter, when you first spawn in, there's a circle on the ground,
R1.
which when you stand in it will charge up, and then whoever's in the circle will get the buff. So you divide into your teams, and then the 3 people that need the buff, 1 from each
Slow.
team,
Do we have a well?
will start the encounter by being in
Okay,
the
I got a
circle.
well. I got a well.
Alright.
Um,
Do it.
fuck.
Do it. Do it.
It's kind of split. The encounter's kind of split into 3 lanes. That first area where you spawn, we consider the back, and then there's a big chasm,
I'm pretty
and
much
on the
out.
other side there's braziers which will light up as you complete the encounter.
Did you have it or no?
That's kind of the front.
Okay, did I hear crystals?
Um,
Or did I hear?
There's kind of left lane, middle lane, right lane, and what worked for us is calling
Sorry, are we
M1,
out of order?
R1, L1,
Okay.
Are we going
but
mid yet?
just any way you can communicate to
25.
your
Yeah,
team
let's do it. Let's do mid.
which crystals are spawning,
There's a well here.
and when,
Go.
and where.
Do it.
It's great to have that communication going at all times.
Lots for crystals.
And just always take note of your buffs as well, because if the buffs get messed up
Fuck. Can you get those?
on your
Yeah,
teams,
I'll do it. I'll do it.
you need to be calling for someone with or without the buff to be able to fill in their place. And
Right.
usually,
Crystals.
M1.
yeah,
See it?
I don't know where I was going.
I-
Usually it'll
I-
be
I-
like
where's
mid
left?
team that will be helping with that.
I don't think we really explained why it's important that
See it?
you're switching the buffs to begin with.
I'm gonna die.
Oh, so how long is it? How long is the
20
timer?
seconds.
Is it
It's
a
a,
minute?
it's a minute.
I got
Yeah.
well. I got
Yeah.
well.
I can
Yeah,
take
so-
it. I can take it if you want.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's the buff that we've been discussing, which is called Witch's Blessing, and there are
Where the ogre's at?
numerous different types of enemies in the encounter. Some of them are blessed and some of them are not. So if you have the blessing, you can damage the blessed enemies, otherwise they're immune, and vice versa. If you're blessed, you can't damage the regular enemies. If you're unblessed, you can damage the regular enemies, but you can't damage the blessed enemies. So right off the bat, that's one reason that the buff is important, because you can only kill half of the ads on the field at any given point in time. So that's one of the reasons we split teams of two, and each team at any given time, one person has the buff and one person does not have the buff. The second reason that you need to switch is because the moment you pick up the buff, you have a 1 minute countdown. And at the end of that 1 minute countdown, you will
I can use the tether.
receive the Witch's Curse and you will die,
Anywhere I can orbs.
which is bad. So the way to avoid that is
Not
there's a
that well,
vessel.
a little bit spark.
So based on the callouts Chip just described, the forward,
That's 3.
middle, right down the stairs, there's a large sphere. And what has to happen is anyone who's in the ring, when it's activated, will swap to whatever they didn't have. So if you didn't have the buff, you'll receive the buff. If you do have the buff, you lose the buff. And to activate it, one person who is blessed and one person who is unblessed has to shoot the large ball in the middle. And that will perform the what we call the switch. And so you need to keep yourself alive by performing this switch basically every 40 seconds was our rule of thumb, just to make sure that we didn't have anybody dying to the debuff.
No, I have it. I can res them. I can res them.
Right.
Yep.
It will be
Crystal.
obviously very noticeable when you accomplish that switch, once everybody's in the radius, and at least one person who's blessed and at least one person who's unblessed knife or shoot or do damage to the rock, it will explode.
Is this ogre?
It'll go away. A little message will pop up in the feed, and you should see your buffs switch. It's important to pay attention to your buff, and if you die, whether or not you were buffed or not. It's not a total wipe if somebody who is blessed loses their buff,
I got well.
but they need to be able to correct it. And you can get back on rotation by being careful about whether or not you get
Someone res
in
them. I
on
don't
the
have my res
switch.
on right.
If you're outside that radius when they do the switch,
So he was blessed right.
you
Yep.
just
Oh,
won't
res-
be switched.
Crystals.
There's a
Crystals?
brief window
Dark.
after the switch happens where if you enter it, it might still switch you. That could just be a networking thing, but just be careful about that.
Middle, 10 seconds.
But you're able to correct
Staying in.
and get yourself back on track if you die.
Do it.
But you have to be
Right side has it
communicating
now.
and you have to be
Doesn't have it.
knowledgeable about
Are we good?
whether or not you should skip a switch
No.
or not.
What side is that?
No, we're fine. We're fine. And the reason that it's important that we have 3 and 3, blessed and unblessed, is because again, like Mojo said, you have to shoot these crystals, and you can only destroy them if both
We're done.
someone with the blessing and without the blessing are shooting them simultaneously. So they'll spawn one left, one mid, one right. So we have teams of 2 that should have a blessed and unblessed.
Calling
And can
this
automatically
back
take
where
care
we
of them
are?
immediately. But if you
What about middle
start to
back,
drop people,
middle?
out of the,
Why would
the
you
rotation,
do that?
then you are missing. You're either missing blessings or you have too many blessings.
Yeah.
One in the back, 3 in
you'll
front.
need to start
1, 2,
calling
3.
Yeah.
Ninths. Is that
where
enough,
those
or do we
people need to
4?
go, which is a lot more communication, which then introduces
I think
a lot
3's
more
fine.
opportunity for
Nobody
errors.
Yep.
Yeah.
3
So those, the crystals
Can we
will
try
wipe
again?
you. You only have
Yeah.
about 10 seconds
Yep.
to destroy the
Alright,
crystal.
3, 2, 1,
go.
Yes. So about
And
the. Sorry, go ahead.
I was
This has been
just
cleared,
gonna
so
say
there's no, like, there's no,
two
like,
crystal phases.
Yeah.
twist
no,
or
and then
anything
you
at
have
the
the
end.
ogre.
It's just rinse and repeat.
That marks each phase. So we're basically killing crystals, running back to the middle of the switch, putting down a well, killing the ogre, and then going to get more crystals. And I think it was 3 crystals per phase, and there's 3 phases.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. So we liked to switch right at the ogres. So we did 2 crystal phases.
and then
20
switched.
seconds. Should we do it? And then
Yep.
we stayed
middle.
there
Now.
in the well. So we planted a well on the vessel and stayed there
Right,
after
good
the switch to kill all of the ogres.
Yep.
Crystals?
Yeah, and then for ogres we found
see it.
1k
I don't see it,
Infinity
fuck.
Lords,
I don't
super
see it either.
useful, as well as
Crystals
the
did not
mountaintop.
spawn.
There
And
another
then in
spawn?
terms
Now
of
they
the
spawn.
They're up, they're up, they're up,
exotics,
they're up.
And super is you're running the warlocks wells with Phoenix, hunters with tether, and then Titan didn't
That's
matter so
fine.
much on this first encounter. I think you were just running skull
Yeah, I was just running skull for it. That was purely just
Time.
for ad clear.
personal survival.
23.
Yeah, I just
Let's
do it. I wanted to be
Middle,
aggressive
middle.
about clearing the ads and making
Ready
take
for
a couple
ogres?
more bullets than,
I'm gonna drop.
Ogres are
dropping
here.
than anyone else.
Dropping a well.
In terms of armor choice,
Left
if
tether.
you're Orpheus, or sorry, if you are Tether, you run Orpheus. If you are Warlock for this first section,
Oh, is that-
because there's no DPS
both.
phase,
That's good.
go ahead and run Phoenix.
Crystals?
You don't need
Crystals
Luminous right
smalls.
now.
The reload.
How's our timers?
But be aware
30 seconds.
30. Wait for a little
that
bit.
if you completed Leviathan, the original raid back in year 1 or even now,
All right,
that
everyone ready?
armor in your collections,
Yep.
Do it
you'll
now.
still
Middle.
pull it. And if you inspect it and go to its mod slot,
New shape.
there are special mods that you don't need to drop. They're just already part of the armor. And if you equip that armor
one.
and put on a mod, they still work even though they're from year 1. They still work in this raid and in the menagerie. Very important ones for me were if you pull the, again, year 1 Leviathan armor, the class
Time.
item.
30
There's a
30
mod you
seconds.
can put on one
Give
for
some
each
time.
element that just
We'll wait for the well in
increases
the middle.
all elemental damage by 25%.
Alright, can we
That
do it?
means all your grenades,
Can we do it?
Middle. Middle.
your
Do it middle.
super,
Wait for Mojo. Wait for Mojo. Wait for Mojo.
Okay,
Do
do
it
it.
Now.
the chest piece has one that gives power overwhelming, which is when you pull out your heavy and you kill a yellow bar
With the
or an
alphabets on
orange
top.
bar, you will have 30 seconds
Crystals. You see it?
of
L3.
15,
Yep, yep.
I believe it's 15%
One.
increased heavy damage to everything. 30 seconds is a long time. I had pretty much permanent 15% buff on my heavy
Are
for
you on time?
the entire raid.
30. Not
So
yet.
if you have the chance to pull those mods, and if
Next
you can
wave is ogres,
afford
yeah?
to infuse a
Okay.
chest piece
So
or
let's
class
switch. Let's switch
armor
now
up,
and get ready for him.
I'd recommend looking into it.
Okay. To the
One
middle.
here?
Middle.
And I
Middle.
think
middle.
we're gonna cut it there,
Middle.
so
We did it.
Do it.
good luck in
All right. Be ready for
your
ogres.
Carnosaurs.
Get the res. Did you have or not?
I didn't have.